Welcome to Storytime, brought to you by the OWSCyCon2019, the online book event of the year.
It's John. He's gone. Strange. You know how he loves animals, always has? Yesterday, Daisy's voice trembled and she turned pale. You know our Labrador, Ben? Well, he just killed him. Just because he scratched at the door. He only wanted to go out and pee. And when I asked him why, he said in this horrible, frozen voice, "Because he bugs me." Just that. Oh my God, Eliza hugged her. And you let him? Daisy looked angry for a moment. Let him? Eliza, how was I supposed to stop him? He's 6'4" and he had a hammer in his hand. I mean, what if John suddenly decides that I bug him? We took in the implications of that. But John would never. He never would have. Before yesterday. But he's changed. Everyone's changed. She was right. It wasn't just those kids abandoned in the park. The whole city was full of them. Some just lay or sat where they had been put, outside houses and apartment blocks. Others had wandered off, and some, unfortunately, had already succumbed to natural hazards. For instance, I know for a fact that there were more than a few kids eaten by dogs. After all, the dogs were hungry too, for if people had no use for children anymore, they had even less use for their pets. And some, and these were the worst cases, were found a use for after all. I don't have to talk about that either, for all that Eliza calls me a cold, self-centered scientist. I have limits. I'm a father. We took as many as we could into our home, and Daisy and Eliza fussed about like Florence Nightingale angels in a war zone, feeding and cleaning and soothing. Daisy didn't want to go back to John and his hammer, and I couldn't blame her. Looking around at these wan-faced, sniveling children, I was reminded of how helpless the human infant is. At 3 months, a baby cow or horse is already running and grazing, a baby rabbit digging burrows, but a human child is lost without its parents. I gotten used to starting the day with a coffee and Brahms on the deck, while Eliza went off to a class on contemporary Latin American literature. But with 10 kids and Daisy living in our 3-room townhouse, life was crazy. Kids running about everywhere, crying, laughing, defecating, pissing their pants, knocking stuff over, demanding attention. It was bedlam. And yet, I wasn't going to just chuck them out. And I wasn't even related to the brats. You'd think a whole lot of parents simultaneously abandoning their kids would be a crisis, right? And it was. But there was worse. You see, the world hadn't gone completely mad. People still went to work and collected their paychecks. Shops still sold things. Movie theaters still showed the latest Hollywood blockbusters. In fact, if you watched the news, you'd think nothing at all was going on. It was all about politics and celebrities and the usual stuff. That in itself, the fact that the sudden steep decline in parental responsibility didn't even rate a mention, was odd. And for those who could look after themselves, nothing was going on. Nothing that interested them anyway. As for those who depended completely on others, that was a different story. Anyone who was in the position of receiving without being able to contribute, I mean those with severe disabilities, mental health issues, the elderly, and so on, well, they weren't receiving anymore. Nobody cared. And if you want to know what that looks like, well, let me tell you. Eliza's Aunt Margaret lived in a nursing home not far from us, so we'd usually go over to visit the old lady on Tuesday night. So this Tuesday, as usual, we drove over to Rose Cottage, leaving our hugely inflated family under the care of Daisy and Jed, one of our other friends who hadn't, so far, succumbed to the general indifference. We walked in through the secure double doors and were met with a scene almost indescribable in its pathos and misery. It was like Lord of the Flies, except instead of young boys, it was old folks. The nursing home had a huge dining room in which everyone normally ate, or was fed their meals. Those who couldn't make the dining room, or who didn't feel like it, stayed in bed and got tended to there. Not well, this was a nursing home after all, but adequately in general. Well, now the residents had split, if that's the right word, into 2 groups. The first group had colonized the dining room and were sitting about with the television blaring, stuffing themselves with microwave dinners and jelly. They were filthy, stinking, but happy. The second group lay torpidly in chairs, or sometimes on the floor, and from their collapsed cheeks and listless eyes you could see that they hadn't eaten for some time. Of course, those were the ones who still had eyes to plead and mouths to whimper. The others, and there were at least 10, were clearly past all that. Nobody paid them the least attention, beyond an occasional irritated glance when one of the plumper residents had to maneuver their wheelie walker around them. Holding our noses, horrified, Eliza and I made our way to room 301. At once we saw that we were too late. Aunt Margaret, a frail, demented woman in her 80s, had obviously tried to get herself out of there. She got out of bed in her nightie and managed to get halfway to the door of her room. Then she collapsed in a crumpled heap, teeth beside her on the rug. Her personal alarm was still beeping away, ignored by all and sundry. She already smelled. Oh, the poor, poor woman. Eliza knelt and stroked the thin white hair, then looked up at me in absolute horror. How could this happen? How could people do this? I could have told her, as a part-time student of human nature, that humans can put aside any compassion when they deem it necessary. As can all animals, I suppose. But this was unusual, to say the least. We walked back through the Darwinistic hell that was the dining hall, feeling dazed and sick. Eliza looked around in confusion. Where are the staff? Gone, just like the mothers and the fathers. How can they behave this way to each other? Doesn't anyone care? She said in bemused disgust. You know the situation's bad when even Eliza can't bring herself to be angry. Because at this point, we'd gone beyond anger. It was as if the strong had, suddenly and without motive, decided to divest themselves of the weak once and for all. Ironically, I thought, they had shot themselves in the foot. For the strong need the weak, whether they know it or not. It was just a question of how long it would take them to find out.
This story time was read by Nikki, Hyson, and brought to you in conjunction with the OWSCyCon 2019. OWSCyCon runs from May 17th through May 19th. You can find us at OWSCyCon.OurRightSide.com. Again, OWSCyCon.OurRightSide.com. We have events happening across all genres. If you are a reader, you cannot afford to miss this event. You never know. You may just find your next best read.